So hey everyone, my name is Wendy with Nourish Colorado. Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully y'all are settling in with some lunch or something in front of you. This is the third of 5, I think, webinars we are hosting on our law and policy roadmap. Hopefully you signed up for the right one. Today we are going to be talking about the use and implementation of values in the procurement of food using public dollars in the state of Colorado. So welcome all of you and work in all facets of procurement and also just love to nerd out on policy with us. So in terms of where we're at, thank you, Paula, for introducing language justice. I want to do, you know who I am. I'm Wendy. I'm just going to have my colleagues here just unmute really quickly. There will be 4 of us, Wendy, Kiana, Jess, and Becca, will all have speaking roles today. So Kiana, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kiana Mickey. I am a food systems and equity consultant and have been based in Harlem, New York, but been working with Nourish on this project. And I look forward to our conversation today.
Yay. And Jess, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning or afternoon, everybody. I am Chef Jessica from Nourish Colorado, Director of Healthy Food and Institutions, and very obsessed about policy and procurement and how we can support our institutions with creating the change we want to see.
Hey, thanks. And then lastly, I will have Becca introduce herself. So just a little bit of background. Becca Gradone just recently started with us, as in last week, at Nourish Colorado as a legal analyst. Last spring, Becca did a 4-month legal externship with us at Nourish and is a primary author of the, I think 130-page extensive law and policy roadmap, a snippet of which we'll be talking about today. And her work was overseen by a lawyer, Tabor Ward. Some of you know Tabor's on another call right now and couldn't join us, but Becca's also going to talk a little bit today. So Becca, I want to say hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becca. It's so nice to see you all. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Arvada. As Wendy mentioned, yes, I helped create the roadmap and I'm excited to see the policy webinar layout today. Also, if you notice me looking over all the time, there's a little wasp friend. I gave it some honey, so it's but very close to me.
That's funny. Thanks, Becca. And if you all didn't have a chance to chat in a little bit about yourself, please do chat in who you are, where you're calling in from, anything you want to share about what brought you to the call today, if you haven't done that yet. A few housekeeping notes. We are recording this in both English and Spanish. Please use the chat feature. Make sure your computer, your phone is muted and use the chat feature to talk. We are going to go the full 90 minutes. We'll be together till 1:30 Mountain Time. The last half an hour will be primarily small group breakout discussions with all of you. A couple of other quick things to share as well. We are working right now to get the finalized, fully translated copy of this slide deck. So when we have the fully translated copy of the slide deck, my colleague Jessie, who's on the line, will be chatting that in so you can follow along. We'll also email this after the call. And I'll heads up, there are some slides that the content is so thick and dense that some of the slides, the first slide is English and the second slide is Spanish. So we might toggle back a little bit between the two. So moving on today, how we're going to spend our time together today. We did our welcome. In just a minute, I'm going to pass the mic back to Kiana to go through some group agreements. I will go into a little bit about who we are at Nourish Colorado, a little bit about the background and purpose of the roadmap we're talking about. Kiana will walk us through how we're also, in addition to the extensive legal analysis, you know.
Hey, Lula.
Oh, and if you're not muted,
it's your birthday today?
Oh, happy birthday to whoever that is. But if you could meet yourself, that would be great. Thank you. And then Kiana will talk about how we're weaving in equity and collaboration throughout this process, in and around and on top of the legal analysis. Wow, I have a hard time with that word. And then Jess and Becca are going to be leading us through the content, like what came of this legal analysis work, and walking us through the content. And then we'll spend the last 30 minutes in small groups together. So that is our agenda for the day. So Kiana, I want to walk through group agreements.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Wendy. Yes, so community agreements, we are hoping to have, a robust and intentional conversation today with everybody. So we want to make sure folks feel like we're able to set a stage for that kind of conversation. So we wanted to introduce some group agreements, or some folks call them community agreements. And if anybody's not familiar, please drop in the chat and I can offer a little bit more context to it. But if we are familiar with them or open to them, we wanted to lift these up in particular because we thought this could help us foster a constructive dialogue, but also holding ourselves as facilitators as well as participants accountable for the time that we are sharing together today. So the agreements that we had listed, and if folks have their own favorites, please feel free to add in the chat as well. We wanted to share and lift up, listen actively and share intentionally. One mic, one speaker. And also I would add to that, just being mindful if your mic is still on or off. So I tend to take a look down and just see if I'm muted or not. But if you are trying to talk, you can come off mic, but let's make sure we're trying to have one person speak at a time. Otherwise, it will be harder for folks to be able to listen actively and be present and engaged. I think we're all going through some busy days and busy times. We're really appreciative that folks have made 90 minutes available. So we're hoping that folks feel like this is an active zone to share. And if you do need to be off video, we understand that too, but happy to be here and just active together. Taking space and making space. This is really in terms of, especially in our breakouts, if you're someone who shares often and enthusiastic, just to be mindful and just check in if other folks haven't had a chance to share, and creating space for that. And also making space if you are somebody who tends to be a little bit quiet or don't feel like you're ready to share. We want you to feel encouraged to share, and we want you to take up a little bit more space and to be able to engage. So it makes for a vibrant conversation. And then lastly, confidentiality. Just taking the lessons and leaving the details. We hold that there are different people coming here holding different hats, multiple hats in some cases, and multiple jobs and potentially jobs and affiliation. So just want to be mindful of how folks are able to show up actively and just take back what we're learning. But if folks share their names or titles and don't want to share that afterwards, just take the lessons, but leave some of the contact details here in our conversation. And back to you. I'm going to pass the mic to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Kiana. I jumped that one a little bit. So I will be advancing slides for this entire presentation too. So Kiana, Becca, Jess, please just give me a little move on and I will do that and hopefully do an okay job. So just a little bit of background on who we are at Nourish Colorado. For those of you who are new to us, I for one see several new faces on the line, which is great. We are a statewide organization. We do work in every corner of the state. Our office is in Denver, so we're technically Denver based, and we have staff also located on different places around the state. Our official mission, almost, we're about to finally approve this, is that we are change makers who strengthen connections between farms, ranches, and communities so that all Coloradans have equitable access to fresh, nutritious foods. And we envision Colorado communities where fresh and local foods enrich the lives of all. Also important to note is that we do this through this work, through state and federal level policy advocacy for systems change. We do it through managing and running statewide initiatives, and we do it through a lot of partnership and community collaboration. So, yep, sorry about that. So don't worry about reading all of the nitty gritty on the slide. This is just an example I just like to share. Please don't worry about the examples that are in here. I just wanted to share a little bit about how we implement our work and how we move towards systems change, and that is guided by our theory of change. So just a really quick note that our theory of change are these 4 pillars on the far left here, that we believe to achieve that vision that we just shared, we need to strengthen nutritious food environments, increase consumer engagement with their food system, channel resources like direct resources to nutritious foods, vibrant farms, and strong communities. And lastly, to increase the economic power for households to purchase nutritious foods. And the middle part of this table here is really all to say what we're trying to do across every activity, every area of our work is to articulate, okay, well, what are we doing in practice, right? What is a program or an initiative that we do on a day-to-day basis to move that theory of change forward? But then what is the policy? What's the sort of the policy advocacy that we're doing to ultimately move that work to permanency? That is sort of our goal across everything that we do. And then we have a very dense slide in Spanish as well. So that's just a bit on how we're moving from practice to permanency through our theory of change. Or we're at least attempting to, because some of this work may take decades, but we're okay with that. So just a quick little bit too, and also I can't really see the chat when I'm screen sharing. So if anyone needs anything, please just interrupt me. Just a little bit about the purpose of the law and policy roadmap. So you all received a link to the, whatever 130-ish page law and policy roadmap that Becca worked on for us last spring. Kudos to you. If you read it, all of it, all the questions in there are quite different. And we will again follow up on this we'll share this presentation with everyone after this call as well. So why a law and policy roadmap? As we have been attempting to move that theory of change forward and be more articulate about how we do systems change work and move to permanency, we realizes that we needed a little more deeper analysis about the activities that we're doing and where change can really happen at the state and federal level. So the purpose of this is, again, to advance our theory of change, to identify key policy questions for us. Oh, hi.
Good, how you doing?
Good, I'm Matt.
Hey, Elliot, I think you're unmuted.
Or no?
Okay, mute please so I can hear you, thank you. I love all the joy going on around us though. We just heard like lovely, joyful interruptions, which is great. We also obviously wanted to provide some legal guidance to us around where there are gaps in like current policies and to identify, okay, where's where actually like law or rules or regs really need to change to do what you want to do. We want to identify and elevate key areas of equity. We are very aware of the fact that when you do policy work, you can do both good and harm, and oftentimes intentionally and oftentimes unintentionally. So we wanted to also look at this with eyes wide open around who is really going to benefit and who may not, and who may be actively harmed by steps that we take in policy. We do want to look at direction for both federal and state policy. Those are the levels that we focus on as an organization. And we're also doing right now, we are in the process of doing our own strategic plan. So all of this is really informing our policy-oriented strategic plan. Lastly, we're wanting to do this to provide research and guidance to other partners, coalitions we're a part of, who may be honestly in a much better position to lead on some of these issues than we are, that are elevated in the law and policy roadmap. So we really want this to be guidance for anyone and others as well. So overview, so just what is in the roadmap? For those of you who weren't able to open it or see sort of that front part of it, the law and policy roadmap does include 7 legal objectives that Becca and others that she worked extensively with really dove into. So a couple that we already did a webinar on is looking at the issue of integrating SNAP produce benefits directly onto the SNAP EBT card. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking more about providing local food vendors with funding and technical assistance to able to have access to modern technology. And that's really looking at the issue of like direct market operations and low cost or no cost access to say EBT equipment so they can accept SNAP benefits. Today, we're talking about values-based procurement. In 3 weeks, I think, end of September, we'll be talking about integrating food into the school system. Right now, we live in a sort of fractured world where, you know, food and school lunch is really looked at as very separate. It's not treated as a part of the core curriculum. It's not given the same time or resources as the rest of the school day. We also looked at opportunities, legal barriers or opportunities to create a farmer equity office in the state of Colorado. We looked at examples to increase federal grants that are run through the state that increase access to nutritious food. And then last week we discussed, for those of you who joined us, we discussed expanding eligibility for providers that can receive child and adult care food program benefits, which is similar to the National School Lunch Program. It reimburses providers for feeding their kids. Oh, and I was supposed to go on. Sorry, I missed my next slide, but those are the 7 issues that we dove into in the legal analysis. And I'm gonna have to beg your patience for 1 second. Kiana, before I kick it back to you, I'm gonna have to refresh my Google Slides here to see if the translated slides came in. So just 1 second, everybody. I have to refresh my slides. And then Kiana, I will pass it over to you. And feel free to like chat in any questions or clarifications while I'm doing this. All right, I'm going to pull the slides back up. Do. Okay, Kiana, here you go. Can you see your slides now?
Yes, I can.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you so much. So yes, just piggybacking on what Wendy had started to lay the groundwork on. When we were starting this project, we thought it was important to identify some hard truths in our work, namely in the food system and laws and the regulations, that these are parts of our institutional systems that are built on exploited land, things like the atrocities and genocide of indigenous people, slavery of Black folks. So our laws don't work in a vacuum, and there's still a lot of inequity that lives within our work. And we continue to see in our current times the barriers to changing policies to become more equitable, so our food and farm policies in particular, and how that can still have impact in the divestment of communities of color and other marginalized communities, and how we also are sometimes hindered in supporting agriculture, good agriculture practices. So holding that, and in our journey of building this roadmap, we realized that it was important to utilize a lens of equity to help inform us on the different ways that we can view not just current laws and policies, but how are we able to start to see opportunities for advocacy and change, and also can we identify innovative ways to collaborate with partners further. So when thinking about equity, I think it's important to kind of hold like there can be an intersection of equity and not just broad equity. So like looking at economic equity in this work, racial equity, and environmental equity. So in the laws, in the representation of our partners and such. So we do feel that even with the persistent issues that we're struggling with or tackling, that policy can still be a powerful tool for change, even though it's been used for harm. So in this work, we're trying to acknowledge that, but also honor and hold ourselves accountable to the intentional and unintentional impacts that policy can have, but still, again, trying to find a way to utilize it for positive and equitable change. Oh, yes. And then we can move to the next slide. So what that looks like for us in this work so far has been, trying to build a roadmap that kind of helps outline a way to build impact with the work and the assets that Nourish has, as well as in collaboration and honoring the work and assets that partners have. Also building in intentionality around connecting to Nourish's theory of change that Wendy shared earlier, as well as assessing the best use of how to utilize organizational capacity and resources. So a little bit later, we're going to go into breakouts, and hopefully we can continue to kind of talk about that a little bit more too, and also be strategic about our future work planning and strategy, and also being transparent and partner engagement. So we're hoping that these sessions are really continuing and with the work that Nourish has done, but also kind of a starting and using the roadmap to kind of help build continued transparency in our engagement with partners. So this is a road that we've started in this work with the great work that Becca and Tabor have done, and Wendy as well, and looking forward to continuing to offer that to our partners and see how we can build on the journey ahead. And so with that, we're going to dig into the legal objective of procurement policy. I know there's a lot, so I'm passing the mic to Wendy.
Yes.
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 Thanks, Kiana. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Kiana. And again, as she said, we are about to start getting into the weeds. So buckle up, hang in there, because we're going deep. But again, this is so incredibly important, because our public institutions every single year all across the United States, this is like schools to city governments, they are spending billions of dollars on food purchases. And we strongly believe that they have the opportunity to lead the movement for food system change, really by expressing their community's values and influencing these supply chains. So when we're looking at our legal objective and procurement policy, it's important to understand the landscape, what's happening nationwide, where we as Nourish Colorado feel we can really fit in and offer the most support and guidance and structure for creating these processes and these policies, and just give you a base foundation for what procurement even is. And then we can really start diving into recommendations, the current landscape, and some model practices that are already out there. So nationwide, there's an organization called the Center for Good Food Purchasing, and they have developed a program called the Good Food Purchasing Program, GFPP. And this is a very flexible framework that assesses institutional food procurement choices and helps to encourage them to use 5 values that they have identified when procuring food. And so these 5 values are effectively local economies. This is all about supporting diverse, family and cooperatively owned small and mid-sized agricultural food processing operations. Environmental sustainability. This is like sustainable production systems, taking care of the land, the soil, the water, reducing the use of pesticides, protecting like our wildlife systems that are already out there, enhancing them, reducing water consumption, things along those lines. We also have valued workforce. So this is all about supporting workers' rights, giving them the opportunity to collectively bargain for better wages, better working conditions. They have animal welfare, plain and simple, healthy and humane conditions for our farm animals. And then they also have nutrition, which is basically promoting health and well-being, offering more fruits, vegetables, minimally processed foods, things along those lines. Denver specifically has an active campaign right now, and they are also looking at weaving in equity as a 6th pillar that, again, isn't a standalone. It works within all 5 of those pillars that GFPP has identified. And the center is currently exploring adding in equity as a 6th pillar at that nationwide level. So here's a model that's in place. It's up and running. There's a handful of cities across the nation that are already participating in this with either policies and practices already established, or they're running active campaigns. And we at Nourish Colorado are looking at this model in a way that we can use it to strengthen Colorado's procurement values and also how we fit into this puzzle. And so out of these 5 values, including the 6th of equity, where do we fit in? And we really feel like it is within local economies, the fresh, nutritious food ones, and again, supporting these equitable processes, specifically with a focus on supporting BIPOC and underserved farmers. So this is where we are right now. Let's keep rolling. I'll go next slide and give a second for a translation. Nope, okay, we're good. Okay, so procurement can get really wonky. At the core level, when we are talking about institutional food procurement, this is as simple as the process of buying foods for meal programs. I want to serve a chicken salad on my menu. I have to buy the chicken, the bread, the onions, the celery, the mayonnaise, all of that. That's what it is. How I am buying and choosing that chicken, the onions, whatever else is going in there, can either be just a very simple, I'm looking for the lowest price, or I can do it from a lens of values. And this is where values-based procurement policies come into play, because this starts giving our institutions guidance for procuring products based on the values that they have really identified that they want to prioritize within their communities. And having these values in place is really helpful because it gives us the opportunity to measure and compare what these institutions are purchasing, and again, how they can direct their purchasing power, money, billions of dollars every single year to really start creating these stronger and resilient food systems. So we're here, we're in, and we strongly believe that with the right support and resources provided to our institutions, they can create strong values-based procurement practices that do start creating the shift in our local and regional food systems. Next slide. So we feel this is important, and yes, slides will all be sent out afterwards, and this is being recorded. Okay, cool. Making sure I check the chat. So we think that this is very important, again, within our 3 identified focus areas for what we as a nonprofit are able to do, because we're, a small nonprofit. Number 1, valuing local food economies. So across the board, this is all about providing financial support for diverse small and mid-sized farms and supporting small food businesses and retailers. Our institutional food markets are strong, stable markets for our small and mid-sized agricultural producers and businesses to access. And the more we can create those connections and let them be working together, again, the better success we can see happen. Our institutions, these meal programs are also community access points for healthy food. They might not be specifically viewed as that, but we really want to change the landscape and the conversation around that to where whether you're at a hospital, you're going to a community college, you're attending school, this is a place where you can be guaranteed a fresh, healthy, nutritious meal that's also being focused with values and really supporting, again, those local and regional food systems that we are trying to strengthen. The other one is all about valuing fresh and nutritious foods. So again, we really want our institutions to be preparing and serving meals that promote healthy eating and overall well-being, and be a place to where the community can access that level of food, high quality food, that typically is unaffordable or really just hard to access. And the more we can create the system and the culture for these institutions to prioritize values-based procurement, we do believe that it can have these ripple effects to where the community and the supply chains will shift, creating and increasing more access to fresh, nutritious foods, even outside of these institutional food markets. And then with the last one for valuing equitable processes, I've said it, but we do believe that because of the purchasing power that our institutions have, they can steward equitable food access in communities and these systems that really are disproportionately affected by nutrition insecurity. They have the power to do this. Again, spending billions of dollars a year on food versus myself as a single consumer really operating from my own values when I'm looking to buy and procure food. So our individual decisions are important. However, if we want to create change and create change faster, even though it still might take a decade, our institutions really are the way to go. Next slide. And so before I pass it over to Becca, at its base, I'm going to talk about procurement methods. And typically, in institutions, there's 2 different types of models that they are operating when it comes to how they're running their meal programs. We have a self-operating model which is where that institution, everything is being done in-house, from ordering the food, building the menus, planning the inventory, costing it out, preparing, serving the meals. It is run in-house. And there's a lot of opportunities within self-operated institutional models versus potentially this other model that we see, which are food service management companies, things like Sodexo, Chartwells, Aramark. This is basically another company coming in, taking over and running that food service operation. And they tend to have regional leads who are doing the procuring of the food for all of the operations that they're running within that specific region. There's a lot of opportunity for creating faster change by working with food service management companies because of the volume of food that they are procuring. However, they do tend to have a little bit more of a stringent system to follow. Sometimes it can really work out well, but they can be a little bit tougher to get involved with. So we're not closing the door on either operational model, but it is important to be aware that for some systems, if you're wondering why your local college isn't able to create change as fast as you really want to see, it could be because they're working under a food service management company and they're operating at like a nationwide or even an international level when it comes to that corporation. So just keep that in mind, because that's kind of the core at the top. And then all the institutions have different procurement methods that they have to follow, with school districts being the most stringent and challenging to navigate. When it comes to choosing the procurement method, it really comes down to how much money you have to spend and what you're planning on buying. You can always choose a more formal method, even for small amounts of money. There's always the option to choose the more stringent method. However, you cannot choose the more lenient methods if you are purchasing over a certain amount of money. Say, like, if you're buying more than $250,000 a year, the regulatory environment basically sets the stage where you have to follow a formal process. There's pros and cons with any of these different methods. We see things like micro purchases, which are very, very simple. You can just call up the farm down the street, say I want to buy $5,000 worth of food, go from there. It's one time, it's easy, it's simple, it's done. There's small informal purchases where the key is you need to at least have 3 quotes. You can build your values into the small and informal purchases process. It's a lot simpler to really do and navigate. However, it does not give you the ability to really lock in a contract over the course of multiple years, which is where that formal procurement process really comes into play. And so no matter what, when we're looking to procure foods, especially as institutions who are receiving publicly funded tax dollars, we have to require free and open competition. And depending on the type of method that you will be using, there's varying formality levels, like on how that solicitation looks, that process of finding the food. Is it as simple as calling up farmer Dan down the street and buying his vegetables? Or do I have to call Farmer Dan, Farmer Jane, Farmer Bill and get 3 different quotes? Or do I have to put together an entire invitation for bid, a very robust solicitation document, and actually go out and seek proposals for the food based on varying contract terms and just like logistics and stuff? It gets really complicated. But again, many institutions will choose that formal method because even though it is more intense, there are ways to build values into that formal method, but there's also the ability to offer longer term contracts. So you can do that formal method for 3 to 5 years with opportunities to renew. And it's kind of a set it and forget it type of process, which has its challenges as well to figure out. The easier methods, the lenient ones, like our micro purchasing, small purchasing, there's a bit more flexibility within that. And you can really build in these values that we're looking to really promote. And it could be an excellent first step to building a values-based procurement policy as you work towards having more values built into the formal procurement process. It does not have to be a one-size-fits-all, but it's very important to be aware of these procurement methods to really support the process of creating these values-based procurement policies and practices that we would like to see. So that's it at its core. Let's keep going deeper with Becca as she starts talking about the regulatory environment.
Thanks, Jess. So in regulating all of the just described, there are multiple policies and programs in place in Colorado that change this open competition environment and the lowest price requirements to be able to incorporate discretion from the buyer and allow them to consider non-cost related values, such as the values of GFPP, when making procurement choices. We have 3 examples on the slide here today that apply to Colorado. The first is the Buy American provision, which requires schools to purchase United States domestic products to the maximum extent possible, focusing on, in a way, the local economies aspect of GFPP. It's not quite local, but more local than international food would be. The second is the price reasonably exceeds preference requirement, which would allow a school to give preference to an in-state bid over an out-of-state bid if it has generally equal value and quality, and its price is either equal to or reasonably exceeds that lower price of the out-of-state product being sought, giving a benefit or advance in the equation that might be used for deciding which option to go with to the in-state food. Then the third is the Denver Food Vision, which is a plan in place in Denver that sets various long and short-term goals to create and make room for collaborative change in Denver's food systems through mostly using the GFPP framework for city procurement of food. Next slide, thank you. Next, we have some barriers to fully implementing a values-based procurement framework. The first is the full and open competition requirement itself. So this requirement is really supposed to be putting all potential suppliers that could potentially be considered on a level playing field, which sounds like a fair process that would be good, and it does prevent favoritism and unfair dealing. But it also causes contract price to be the main and often only factor considered, and may result in schools or providers being required to purchase the cheapest foods from often the most large-scale businesses, rather than perhaps a slightly more expensive food option that uses better values in its growing or manufacturing or distribution processes. And in relation to this barrier, schools can set procurement guidelines where they can proactively choose to prefer local foods, but this cannot be a specification. So schools, for example, could not only allow local apples to be procured, but they could put it in as a preference in their solicitation that they would prefer to get local apples over non-local. The second barrier is administrative discretion. And this is both the lack of discretion in some circumstances, but also the unidentified discretion and too much discretion being allowed in others. So there are no defined metrics to guide the buyer often in making procurement choices, and they have to use their own discretion to compare procurement options available. So for example, each school food authority can define local food for their own district, and there's not a set definition of what local food means, leaving it up to the SFA, which is both good if their school is using an applicable definition that would be useful to the district, but also could be used negatively and just is not equal or the same across all districts. The second is the definition of reasonably exceeds also does not exist and has to be interpreted by the buyer. This goes back to the price reasonably exceeds preference policy in the earlier slide, in that when you're deciding whether the in-state bid reasonably exceeds the cost of the out-of-state bid, that's up to the SFA to make the decision. Next, please. Opportunities for growth. So within the policy realm that exists right now, there also are some opportunities for growing the policies already in place that are more values-based friendly. The first is the geographic preference rule. So the 2008 Farm Bill permits institutions to use geographic preference in the procurement of unprocessed local agricultural products, which was not allowed before. And schools have the option to, as I mentioned, with discretion, define local and decide how much preference to give these local items. But again, this rule cannot be used as a set aside and require local products are procured, only can be used as a preference that certain local products of fruits or vegetables, wherever it may be, will be preferred in the process of deciding which option to go with. But again, full and open competition as a barrier still cannot be unnecessarily restricted when using this opportunity. The second is increasing the use of solicitation preferences and weighted requests for proposal or RFP criteria. So an SFA may express its interest in purchasing from local sources when writing a solicitation for bid to target local products. And since it's still a more strict way of procuring food through the invitation, it's not sure to grant this, but by putting in solicitation preference, it creates some wiggle room in being able to choose maybe the producer that you would rather go with, whether it's local or fresher food. And then requests for proposals are even more flexible as they allow institutions to score and weigh their proposals ahead of time so that they can create some sort of equation in deciding which procurement option to go with. And in those values of like scores and weights in the values that you can be adding could be things like you get extra points for having food that's harvested within 48 hours, or if the farm provides farm tours. And these are ways to sort of get down to the more local and community level farms available when making procurement choices. Next, I wanted to address some model practices that are available for ideas in creating values-based procurement options, one federal option and one state. The federal bill here was introduced, not passed, but the Fresh Produce Procurement Reform Act would direct the USDA to procure fresh produce for distribution to qualifying nonprofits that are serving individuals at risk of nutrition insecurity. So currently the USDA is already purchasing $2 billion of domestic commodities annually for different feeding distribution programs. But this law, if it went into place, would increase the amount of fresh and local fruits and vegetables being purchased for these programs and really focusing on getting these in a way to address nutrition insecurity in a better way. And then the second is the 30% New York State Initiative, which is 2018 legislation from New York that increases state reimbursement for SFAs who spend at least 30% of total food costs of school lunch programs on New York State food products. So this acts as a way to incentivize and reward school districts for purchasing local foods, which is a great way to get started with procuring local foods, setting up incentives in that way. Okay, on to the recommendations. So initially, I just want to address that these are purely legal recommendations and they are not inclusive of every idea that exists or all the things that we would like to come to fruition from conversations like these webinars or other groups getting involved, other people being involved. So these are purely just legal recommendations that we've come up with through the legal analysis. And there are some recommendations to the existing programs and legislation already in place and some to new programs and initiatives. Do you mean to wait to get the slides back?
Yeah, I'm coming. Sorry, I refreshed
Oh, you're
again
fine.
to see if.
Too.
Okay, good. Keep going.
Yeah, so there's both recommendations for changing or altering or better supporting these existing programs and legislation in place, and then also some new recommendations. So the first for changing a program already in place is adding express inclusivity of agricultural products to the Colorado environmentally preferable purchasing law. It currently does not clearly apply to agricultural products and institutional food procurement. It more applies to other contracting jobs of any sort, like construction, things like that. But the law itself requires that the government body award a contract to the bidder who offers environmentally preferable products, which, going back to the discretion barrier, this isn't defined. So it is a little bit iffy there what that exactly means, but there is a step forward in addressing preference for environmentally preferable products. And essentially this law allows the perhaps more expensive but environmentally favorable choice to be chosen if it meets the same quality standards required of the job or procurement ask that's being sought, being able to choose the environmentally preferable option, even if it is a little more expensive, which traditional procurement does not allow for, and it shoots for that lowest cost. The second is Colorado's small purchase threshold to be increased to the federal level of $250,000. So as Jess mentioned, there are different levels of those procurement methods depending on the size that you're using, and they're set as floors, not ceilings. So if you're under $25,000, you have to use, or sorry, you can use the smallest, most lenient option when making your choices, but you could use more formal if you'd like. But the Colorado's competition not required policy allows state agencies to procure goods or services without competition for procurement up to procurement of $25,000, the smallest category. Then the step above that is the small purchase threshold, which right now in Colorado is $150,000. And this, within this category, the buyer can choose any acceptable bid, which does have some definition behind it in the law, that has the best relative value for the state, rather than choosing solely by the lowest price, which creates, again, more wiggle room in being able to include these values from GFPP when making procurement choices. And so that's why the recommendation here is to increase it to the federal allowed level of 250, because that's how high it can go federally, when we only have it at 150,000 in Colorado, to allow bigger purchases to be able to use these more lenient standards and hopefully include some values from GFPP. And good, okay. So the third recommendation for existing programs is to expand the local food program statewide. And this program provides procurement incentives by reimbursing participating K-12 providers for purchasing Colorado grown, raised, or processed products. It currently is applied to K-12 meal providers that participate in the National School Lunch Program, but expanding it statewide would make it more inclusive and available to all schools. And additionally, on top of expanding it to just schools, it would be the goal eventually to expand it to other meal programs such as early care or the CACFP program, adult meal programs, taxpayer funded procurement options like hospitals, correctional facilities, and colleges, to allow reimbursement in those arenas as well. Then the fourth recommendation is that multiple Colorado food incentives should incorporate the identified GFPP pillars from the beginning of the show here. So the Colorado main local food programs include the local food program just discussed, the Food Pantry Assistance Grant, and the Healthy Food Incentives Fund. So just little ways of getting these values more integrated into how we make choices for how the money in these programs are spent is kind of what the recommendation is going at here. And this might include doing things such as focusing on the nutrition of meals served, whether food is being sourced from Colorado proud producers, which we'll discuss later, but that's an agricultural producer in-state producer certificate. And purchasing food from historically underserved farmers. So just getting ways to value that and consider that when using these program funds. Okay, next, please. Next, we have a couple new initiative recommendations. And the first is that Colorado should enact an equitable procurement law that reflects one of three methods used by other states. So different states across the country have implemented these already, and they've used one of these three options usually, sometimes a mix of them. But these are just three different ways to be able to control the way that you're procuring in a way that is more equitably sourcing the things that you're buying. So the first is a set-aside method, which reserves a certain amount of procurement dollars for small, underserved, and or BIPOC business owners that are identified through a process or other identification process. And essentially, this would be if you had just say $100,000 of what you were procuring for, you specifically set aside 15% of that 15,000 to be used only for this, no matter what. And you could use more than that, of course, depending on what you find, but it would be just setting a set aside of what would have to use that as the bare minimum. Then the second is an economic preference strategy, which gives those identified businesses or farmers of small, underserved, or BIPOC owners an economic preference in the bidding process. So whether, I guess this should say bidding or RFP, request for proposal, because whether it's the equation you're using to try to figure out which option is the best for your buyer, or in the bidding process itself, giving usually a 5 to 10% like boost in their score so that they can be given a little bit of a higher value based on their equitable identity. And then the third is the limited competition environment, which creates a limited competition only for those identified businesses or producers of small, underserved, or BIPOC owners for either bids that are under a certain cash amount threshold. So that would be any bids under $50,000 will be reserved to competition among these identified business owners, or within a certain percentage higher of the cost of the lowest bid. So if, like, for example, White Farmer Joe was offering it for a certain price, any bid that was up to maybe 5 to 10% higher, but owned by one of these identified business owners, would be considered the cheapest option or the best option to go with under the procurement decision-making process. Then we have two more here of new initiatives to be recommended. The first is something that we already talked about a little bit, that Colorado should encourage solicitation preferences and weighted values in their procurement policies all around. So instead of only considering the lowest price with invitations for bid, SFA's school food authorities should really be favoring either solicitation preferences or even better requests for proposals in a way to be able to evaluate sourcing options with the scored and weighted factors available so that you can inject those values into the process itself for greater consideration of having equitably sourced, fresh, and nutritious local foods. And finally here, the Colorado Proud logo and program in place should be used in procurement metrics. Now, this would take a lot more steps and a lot of work. The program would have to be refined to get this in place, but through a long-term set of goals, it should be quite effective in being able to identify marginalized or underserved farmers and also get connections between producers and buyers. So Colorado Proud is a free logo that helps consumers, restaurants, and retailers identify and purchase Colorado produced food and agricultural products. The little logo is right on the left here. You might see it in the grocery store or other places that sell food. And it's really just a way to have a little certificate that, like, yes, I am local to Colorado for those buyers. So other Colorado producer certifications or other types of value focused certs should be refined, as I mentioned, and made more accessible to be able to highlight these local businesses in the market. And having a state level producer program could help bolster the presence for historically underserved and small agricultural businesses by putting them in these, whether it's like websites or sales sheets or anything that allows people going through trying to procure foods, they're coming up in the searches, and also act as a data collection tool to be able to better connect producers and institutions with having more information on the producers available that are Colorado proud. And those are all the legal recommendations. Thank you.
That was amazing. And very extensive and thorough. So wow, thank you, Jess. Thank you, Becca. Tons of information. Thank you all for being patient with my inadequate screen sharing. And before I pass it back to Kiana, who's going to kick us into some small groups, anything, just quick touch base. That was a lot of information. Questions, clarifications, additions, anything that anyone wants to unmute and throw in or chat in the chat box.
This is Megan, just real quick. You guys are so amazing. And we're just all collectively so grateful for how you're moving all this work forward. So as we all do this together, please let us know how we can be the best partners to you and support you all in making all of these amazing things realities for everyone in Colorado. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks.
Love it. And yes, well, stick around for the small group discussions, please. We would love to talk through some of that together, how we can do this more together. And who else were, this network is vast. Who are we missing? We want to talk about all that together. So well, keep any additions, questions, clarifications, please keep on chatting them in. I am going to pass it to Kiana though, so we can move into those breakout groups. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. So yes, we're going to move into our small group breakouts. I think based on our numbers, we're looking at 2 groups. Is that right, Wendy or Jesse?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. So we'll have 2 small breakouts. Wendy and I will be in them, as well as Becca and Jessica and Jesse. So we're going to do the breakouts in one coming together, and then the first one will be around reflections, and we'll offer these small group prompts, so the first 2, and then we'll come back quickly to kind of just have a regroup and see if there's anything that folks want to lift up before we break out a second time, and then same folks. But what we'll do then is to discuss action and strategies. So again, there'll be a mini full group breakout in between those 2. Each breakout session will last about 10 minutes. So you have seen the prompts here. We will have the prompts, Wendy and I will also have the prompts in the breakout rooms, as well as take some broad notes and share. So we do want to encourage folks to, again, share. And we know we shared a lot of information, but curious to hear what folks are thinking. And Megan, you set a great stage for us. So without further ado, I'm going to give Jesse a few beats to put us in our respective rooms. Again, encouraging conversation, and look forward to seeing y'all in the next few minutes. Great. Thank you, everybody. I hope folks had a lively conversation as much as we in your session, as much as we did in our breakout. We got to some really rich questions and started trying to unpack it. And 10 minutes never feels like enough. But Megan and Laurel brought up some really interesting questions around some particularities in fiscal calendars not necessarily matching, and some of the barriers that still are present for farmers. And are there things on the state level that can be unpacked? We didn't have enough time to get into it, but we thought that this might be in our report back, maybe a little bit time for Becca to share a little bit of that legal nuance. And we'll also open it up to the full group to hear what came up in your other breakout.
Should we?
Yeah, do you want to pick up, Becca?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that was really important and on my mind that Megan brought up was the fiscal calendars not matching up with farmers' needs. So having this money available through the food pantry and assistance grant that is supposed to be used to be purchasing from local producers, but you have to spend it down by the middle of the season in a way that is not useful to actually buying from these small local farms that don't just have endless sources and need to be flowing with the season of naturally how food is grown. And we just chatted for a second about how important it is to be really having people with knowledge informing the legislators and informing the way that the programs are created so that they're actually useful and actually applicable to how growing food works and not just in a way that someone arbitrarily decided. And then we also spoke about the barriers that exist with people not having any desire to work with institutions because of their identity, perhaps, or other reasons, and creating more openness in human resources and accessible technology that meets them where they're at and also leverages the data available in a way that can connect more producers and buyers for actually helpful procurement connections and not things that people are not willing to participate in.
Yeah. It's kind of, thank you for sharing that, Becca. And it does touch on, like, I think what we were talking about too, it's like holding that truth, holding the multiple truth that while our systems and policies and funding can be supportive to the work, that because of our history of inequity, that there's oftentimes that people opt out. And so I think, what is coming up, or it sounds like, is there can be options around legal actions, and there could also be actions around other approaches that can still meet a way to disrupt or minimize barriers. So I think, yeah, making processes simpler can help. I think being transparent and offering technical assistance, I've seen with farmers, in particular small and farmers of color, it starts to help minimize or at least identify what some of the struggles are and why some people are opting out. And if there are ways to build either technical assistance or support to opt in, or to build advocacy points on some of the pieces that might be longer term. And I think in the realm, the lens that Megan had mentioned is that lens of scarcity. And I think it's important because it comes up in a lot of different ways. But I think the more that we can continue to find ways to collaborate together and lift up what we are hearing from the ground, this can really start to make some shifts, I'm hoping. So I think that's potentially like a good segue too, in terms of, for the other group, we're curious to what maybe these prompts brought up for you, and what were some of the trails of conversation that you might have had.
Yeah, hey all, anyone can jump in here too. I also am a little cognizant of time. I'd love to keep 10 minutes for the next breakout. So maybe I'll just share on behalf of the group sort of one thing that we did talk about a lot. And that was an amazing update and discussion. Thank you, Group A. One thing that came up a lot too is just how really extensive GFPP is, and really understanding Colorado's readiness to sort of go all in to these 6 pillars. And that could be it could be an incredibly overwhelming way to even approach the state. So how do we do a better job of understanding what is Colorado really poised to do? Where are we poised to have influence? Where are we poised to begin in this pretty comprehensive process? So lots more work to do. And I think just so we can have 10 minutes, or at least close, I think maybe we could move to the next groups.
That sounds great. So thank you for sharing that. We'll be in the breakouts right now. And we'll have the prompts together, so we'll share it one more time.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kiana. Everyone, thank you. For all those of you who could stay for the whole time, thank you so much. I trust the other group had a really great conversation as well. So I just really quickly wanted to go over a couple of next steps. This was a lot. And if I were you, I'd be thinking, wow, great conversation. So what? What are you going to do with it? It's going to take us a long time to do a lot with it. I'll tell you that much. But we are going to share back with you. Step one, we have recording, we have notes, we have this slide deck. We'll share it with everyone who registered and anyone else who wants it. For us right now, since we're in the middle of our strategic planning, all of this is context that we're sharing with our strategic planners in terms of the legal analysis and all of the context and the feedback we're getting here. This is informing our organization's Farm Bill platform, which we're in the middle of developing and in partnership with others right now. So we are trying to find immediate ways where this is implementing both our state and our federal priorities, at least ours as an organization, and then identifying where else can we bring this forward to other partners who might be in a better position than we are to do this work. And then last plug, I know we're at 1:31 here, is we have 2 more of these conversations. So join us on the Wednesday, the 21st, to talk about increasing access to like low and no cost technology for local and direct market operators so they can do things like accept SNAP and accept WIC. And then on September 27th, around integrating school, making it sort of a core part of the actual school day in the school system. So those are our next 2. Please register if you haven't. Thank you for being here the whole dang time. And have a great afternoon. We'll see you next time, everyone. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.